Seat at the Table is the DNC's new initiative to organize and engage with Black women across the country. We are taking our surrogates, including our DNC members, our officers, our members of Congress, and our elected officials from across this country to talk to Black women about what matters most to them.
I am leaving a legacy behind for my daughters to follow.
We deserve a seat at this table because we've been the backbone of this country for a long time now. Why not now?
All people are created equal, and we should have equal pay and equal opportunity.
We need to take America back to its greatest self, and that means that we need to be inclusive of every American.
When we're at the table, the conversation changes. It's time for us not only to help other people get elected, but for Black women across this country to start running for those offices and take those seats. Take those seats at the local level, take those seats at the state level, and at the federal level.
Being the backbone is who we are. We're going to always be out front because we are the party.
Things must move forward and change must happen. We must continue to be on the forefront. We will demonstrate, we will protest, we will speak out. We are the change. We are America.
I come to you with unrelenting optimism because this is not the first time we've had these struggles. And in the past we've had Fannie Lou Hamer, we've had Rosa Parks, we've had Shirley Chisholm, we've had so many African American women leading the charge.
We are the backbone of the Democratic Party. We are the ones that are knocking the doors, we are making the calls, we are getting out the vote. We are the table. And we are glad to welcome the rest of the country to sit there with us.
Well, on average, women collectively receive about 20% less than our white male counterparts. For African American women, that stands at about 37%. Because of the extreme differences in our pay, Black women are now forced to work 8 additional months into the next year, depending on the previous year of the white male. That's sad. Yes. Mm-hmm. I think the women in this room know all too well, be you Black, white, Latina, Asian American, you get it, right? What could we all do if we actually received our equal share for the equal amount of work that we have put out into this country? Black women and women in general are not just the backbone of the Democratic Party, but we are the backbone of our democracy. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, we are the backbone of the American workforce. And for that, we all deserve a round of applause. Now, I am Wakenya Clanton. Thank y'all. I'm the Director of African American and Women's Outreach here at the Democratic National Committee. And I am just so grateful for all of you who have taken the time to join us here tonight to talk about what's really important to us, and that is pay equity. For far too many women, particularly Black women, you know, we know what it's like to be the breadwinners of our families, the caretakers, I mean, everything, the community leader, the elected official, you know, we do it all. And it's time that we start getting the proper compensation for that. And so thank you. I am just so elated to be able to be joined here tonight by some amazing, bad to the bone sisters, okay? I am here with our equal pay advocate, Miss Joy Chaney. thank you so much, Joy, for everything that you're doing to make sure that women of color get their due when it comes to their pay. And not even just women of color, but I think all women. I mean, you've been out there since April, 4th? At least April 4th of just this year alone, talking about this work, and you've committed yourself to that over the years. And so I am so grateful for you. I think you're like one of my kindred spirit animals. I followed your work when I was at Nobel and other places, and I just want to commend you and thank you for all the time and talent and equity that you put into this work.
Thank you.
Next, we have one of the fiercest sisters that I know in the labor game, Miss Carol Joyner, who is a fierce woman and children advocate. She has put working families ahead of every other sector in her work, and so I just want to thank you and applaud you, Miss Carol Joyner, for being here tonight. Listen, we need more voices like yours championing for those of us who don't necessarily always have a voice, or in this case, a seat at the table. So we thank you for all of your work. And I cannot close out this session without talking about the one of the baddest sisters. I know I use the word bad a lot, but you can't describe these women in any other way because there's no other word to talk about how phenomenal you really are and the work that you do in terms of putting women's reproductive rights at the forefront of each and every conversation. Thank you so much, Beth, for being here with us tonight. Miss Beth Link, y'all, if you don't know her, get to know her. She is one of the sisters who's out there fighting to make sure that our bodies remain our bodies and that we have this equal say in that. So thank you, Beth, for being here with us. Well, I don't want to belabor the conversation because, you know, I could talk about this for a very long time, but I think it's really, really important that we get in and start talking about, you know, why is there actually even a gap to begin with, right? Like, we know the history behind, you know, the workforce where women didn't, they weren't really afforded the opportunity to enter into the workforce, and when they did, their work was kind of minimized. Can we talk about, like, why even now, today, in 2018, that we're still having this conversation around pay equity, and we know what women bring to the conversation, and I'm gonna kick it to Joy to get us started.
First of all, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Bad is appropriate for you as well. You are a bad sister, and the DNC is lucky to have you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
So, yes. And all of us are as well. So why is there a wage gap? There's a wage gap because of the history of our country and how we've divided up labor between men and women. Now, Black women, we've always worked, okay? So our wage gap story looks somewhat different. But the fact of the matter is, when we worked in those jobs, we really were not given the opportunities that afforded our experience and what we were bringing to those jobs and our education. We are more educated than any other group, and yet our equal pay day is more than halfway through the year. That's unacceptable, and it does tell you something about what's going on. We also know that, you know, Black women are still dealing with the family economic issues that many women, but we in particular, deal with. Being a single parent, being the primary breadwinner, being sandwiched in between two generations, having to take on the predominant brunt of that work. So there are lots of contributors to that wage gap. Now, let's just talk just a little bit about what that really means. Because I think a lot of Black women think we know how we are compared to white men. And so Black Women's Equal Pay Day, which is what we're doing today, talks about that 63-cent number. But the truth is, Black women also have a wage gap with Black men. And we have a wage gap with white women. So if you know we're one of the most educated groups and yet we still have a wage gap, we know that there's something wrong, and it's both race and gender that we are dealing with. Our moms have all, and Papa Pope, have always told us that you have to work twice as hard to get half as much, and we used to think that's a joke. But the older that you get, the more you realize, actually, that's true. The numbers are kind of eerily close. And so that's what we're here talking about today, and we need the DNC, and we also need our allies, our accomplices, to get really serious about what it takes to close the wage gap, not just for women, not just on the basis of race, but for Black women on the basis of race and gender.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much. Beth?
Yeah, I mean, first off, thank you so much, Wakenya, for inviting me to this conversation, and to the DNC and the seat at the table for convening this conversation. I think it is incredibly critical. And I'll just say, ditto everything Joy just said, but also I think because we're at the DNC, you also have to look at the ability to make money and be able to earn wages, and what that also looks like for our political representation, and particularly when you're looking at Black women being caregivers or having childcare, and often the ability to run for office and fight for these issues is dependent on the ability to have childcare and be able to have someone who's there to take care of your family while you're out on the road. I think for me, this issue is really personal. I've seen my mother, who is incredibly brilliant, is working, getting her doctorate in education right now. And she took care of us here in DC while working full time. And then when we moved across the country, this brilliant woman with a master's degree took time off from work to take care of the family. And that is a really common story for women, and particularly Black women, and took that time off, and then went back into a workplace where racism and expectations about Black women are run rampant, and faced barriers time and time again to kind of catch up to where she had been in terms of her wages. And so I say all that to say that I think, no matter if you do everything right, work twice as hard, those barriers still exist. And so I'm really excited to kind of talk about those here today.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for that, Beth. Ms. Carol.
Yeah, I really appreciate being here as well. It's great to be at the DNC and to see that this issue of wage parity and equal pay is becoming a talking point as we, go across the country and taking our sort of what's right and what's back for us, for ourselves. What I would say is that this is a historic problem, and you referenced it, Joy. But I'm going to take you back to my own grandmother, who in North Carolina was working with other parents, other Black women in the neighborhood to try to figure out why there wasn't wage parity between white teachers and Black teachers. All women, but white teachers and Black teachers. And it took years to get a meeting with the superintendent. When they did get that meeting with the superintendent, after lots of stalling, and I don't need to meet with these women, and all that you probably know, he finally came clean and said, I have to pay these white women more because they have to hire people to work in their homes since they're teaching. And if no one's taking care of people in the home and cooking and cleaning, they've got to get more money in order to hire people to do that. Well, some of the women who were organizing this conversation were the very women working in those homes. So there's a way in which, race and gender interplay in this conversation, and have done so since slavery. I mean, this nation has been addicted to free labor from the very beginning. It was built on the idea of free labor. And our, breaking through these disparities, breaking through the issues around, equal pay aren't going to be resolved until we address those age-old problems. The only other thing I would also add that, just contributes to all of this are certain factors that I know, Joy, you talk about all the time, like pay secrecy. And the fact that you can't even talk about how much you earn in order to rectify the problem on the job. 62% of women in a recent poll actually just said that pay secrecy is a problem, and they knew that if they talked about their wages and asked people what they earned, they would probably be fired. So, I mean, there are a lot of contributing factors.
Can I jump in on that?
I was just about to segue to you, so yes.
Because we're at the DNC, we can talk more freely.
Yes.
When we talk about pay secrecy, in the previous administration, we had come up with a solution for that. We had a button for that, okay? And it was the EEOC. And they were going to collect pay data on the basis of not only gender, but also race and ethnicity, which would have been critical for all of us. That has been stopped now for very flimsy, no reasons that anyone can figure out, and we're looking right now. There are all kinds of lawsuits and requests to figure out what was the thing that was the problem with something that had gone through a whole process, and then with the flick of a letter and a pen, it could be completely undone. Years of work. Years of work that would have allowed us to have a sense as an enforcement agency, and I say us because I used to work there, a sense of what's going on beyond the veil, what's happening with pay data, not to penalize anyone, but with knowledge. you have a better sense of what industries have the greatest problems. And if you are a company, before you turn in your information to a government agency, what are you going to do? You're going to make sure that you're paying people fairly, right? We've seen that happen in other countries. Other places are getting ahead of the United States and beating us at our own game. We're a place that should be of equality. That's what our Constitution demands. And that's why I know that those of us who are working on Black women's equal pay, we've been saying we have to demand more at work, as consumers, and also at the ballot box, and that's what we're here talking about today.
Yeah, and I love it. I love all the segues. I love all of the things. Joy, you kind of alluded to something when you said, you kind of brought up the idea behind having an agency or an institution that's there to kind of hold folks accountable, right, to pay secrecy in a sense. Carol, can you kind of talk to us about a little bit more about the roles that unions actually play and sometimes making sure that folks are being paid equitable to the work that they're producing? I know right now we have a lot of attacks happening on unions right now with the recent Janus decision and everything that's going on with even our most recent consideration for a Supreme Court nominee. Can you talk a little bit more about what we need to do to make sure, the role that unions play in preserving pay equity, but then also what we can do to kind of help protect institutions like unions?
So I would start with the reality that unions do make a difference. For all those who are, walking around thinking, well, it doesn't really matter anymore, they're a thing of the past, there's so much evidence and so much documentation to show that on wages, on benefits, on retirement security, on health care, on so many factors, unions make a difference. It particularly makes a difference with regard to equal pay. And what we've found over, across the board is that union women earn more than non-union women doing comparable work. About $942 for union women, $732 for non-union women doing the same job per week. And so that disparity, that difference in and of itself just goes to the heart of the power of collective bargaining, of having a voice on the job, and on being able to work sort of in unity with one another. But to your point, Wakenya, about pay secrecy, it gets addressed because in a union contract, most of the jobs, almost all of the jobs are listed. The salary ranges for that job are listed, and the ceiling for it, which gives a worker the indication, what do I have to do to hit that ceiling? How do I go beyond that ceiling? It's all public information. And when information is public, there are no secrets. And so we see a much smaller wage gap inside the labor movement. Now, one might ask, then why is there a wage gap at all? And that's largely because of, what's another factor, which is occupational segregation of work. So you see teachers, earn less in most states than construction workers. Now, there's no logic for why that's the case. They're far more educated. They've gone to university. They're working with the most important investment we have, which is children. What's the logic behind them being paid less? And so this occupational segregation still exists inside the labor movement, but it does get addressed some. And it gets addressed because, again, when everything is codified in a union contract, you actually can see very clearly, what you have to do to break that glass ceiling and get to that higher position. Or you can actually grieve if you think that, jobs for women are, worse than jobs for men, are paid less, so you don't have the same benefits, or that sort of thing. So there are avenues, and when people join together. The total package around health care, retirement security, as I've said before, the access to paid family leave, the access to paid sick days that often gets bargained, all of that reduces the burden on workers, and so that they do not have to, think about, if I stay home and take care of my sick child, will I be fired? All of those issues get played into, whether or not you have job security, and also filter into the conversation about equal pay.
So I think you brought up a really great point, and I see you, Joy, and I'm gonna come back to you, but I think you talked about some of the life realities that kind of exist because of pay gaps, right? Beth, can you kind of talk to us a little bit about the role that pay gaps kind of do play in terms of influencing healthcare decisions, taking care of your family, or even providing adequate healthcare for yourself? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to think about healthcare, reproductive healthcare, when we as Black women are thinking about it and thinking about it in the context of how we take care of ourselves and our families. often it's an economic decision. And if you ask Black women and you ask women what is the biggest concern, it's healthcare in an economic context. And that's what we've been seeing. That's why we saw, you know, many Black women coming to DC or fighting in the States all last year, fighting to protect the Affordable Care Act, and now you know, fighting to protect against any additional attacks on the Affordable Care Act. Because the reality is that 15 million women gained access to birth control coverage as a part of the Affordable Care Act and as a part of receiving that no copay access to birth control coverage. That's important because when you look at economic and educational advancement, having the ability to plan, to know that you have a fund, insurance to cover poor health outcomes, whether it's yourself or in your family, whether having the ability to plan when or how you have children is really critical in how women are able to advance in the workplace, educationally, and so forth. We know that so much so that Fortune magazine actually called birth control one of the most transformative and innovative tools in women's success in the workplace. And we also know Business Forward did some research last year and talked to women entrepreneurs across the country and found that Black women and women of color entrepreneurs in particular said that having access to birth control and having access to health care was a real, very important indicator of their ability to succeed in the workplace and the ability to start their own business and be successful in developing their own businesses. So I say all that to say that having access to it on the front end is important, but then when you look at costs or not having insurance, I think one of the things that, Carol, you shared that's really critical is benefits. We know that Black women are more often to go into, more likely to go into jobs that are lower paying or don't have full benefit package, or, you know, maybe higher paying but doesn't have a full benefit package. And that also comes into pay equity. If you don't have full health insurance or full dental insurance, that matters, and that's not equal. And so if something comes up, that either means taking time away or that means loss of income, and a larger percentage of your income is going to healthcare costs, and that sets you backwards. So you know, I really just cannot overstate how important healthcare is in the equation and the ability to access healthcare in terms of reducing the pay gap.
So Joy, and thank you, Beth. Like I was trying to take it all in at the same time. It's like, okay, that's right. Like there's a lot of stuff, like, you know, check. Yes. But like, so now that we're you know, we've kind of talked about a lot of the factors that kind of are created because we have this humongous gap, right? And some things that we have to consider as Black women. Like, Joy, can you talk to us a little bit about, like, what's at stake if we don't? Like, literally, can we afford to go another year or 2 years or 3 years down the line without closing this gap?
Generational wealth. Our survival, our ability to thrive as a people, as a community. When you invest in women, they invest in their families, they invest in their community, they invest in their nation. So national economic security, community economic security, family economic security. That's right. The stakes really couldn't be higher. And for the individual, we're talking about retirement security. If you are losing between $800,000 and $1 million over the course of your lifetime for Black women over a 40-year career, that's a lot of money taken out. That means that you are a greater burden, if you will, on public services, on your family. So that means you're perpetuating this for a new generation, which now has greater responsibilities. And then their children have greater responsibilities. These are critical things for us to be dealing with as a people and not looking at it. You know, so many times we feel like we have to defend ourselves, that we've been gaslit into believing that the wage gap doesn't exist. You are not crazy.
Right.
It's real.
It is real. Small things become macro things. And so we have to look at them. One of the things we haven't talked about was the minimum wage.
Yes.
And the difference in the tipped wages. Carol mentioned earlier about vestiges of slavery. That the tipping process.
Yes.
Is a vestige that we could get rid of. And I think that one of the things when we talk about Black women running, leading, voting, we're in a moment where we can change anything we don't like.
That's right.
Anything we don't like, anything that's not serving us. Because we are running, we are leading, and we are voting. We are also paying, we are also using those credit cards as consumers when we can stop at any time.
Our spending power is what, $1.3 trillion? Like, that's insane. And to think that that is not like regenerated within our community, or just like it's so sparsely like generated in our community, is a real problem. And I think it's because the culture of being a consumer, the culture of being a worker, and it's not, you know, we don't live in one that it makes opportunity or create opportunity for people who look different than others. And so I think that's a real problem that I think we're going to be addressing over time in this country. But I think conversations like this kind of help keep that in the forefront. And with that being said, I want to kind of talk about some of the policies that actually may be working. You know, we talk about a lot about what's not working, and we also talk about how the current administration has reversed a lot of the things that the former administration kind of put into place. You know, like the 2014 Fair Pay executive order, like that's a real thing that is no longer in existence. It is actually now more dangerous for women in the workplace because of the reversal of that. And so I think that's something else that we have to address moving forward. But I want to end on a positive note, and I want to talk about some of the things that are actually working. So, Joy?
So there are state bills. The federal government, okay. But there are state bills that are being passed around the nation. I mean, what has happened is states have filled a vacuum, and in part due to the leadership of Black women. We are leading, we are introducing legislation in places in the South, in places we weren't before. We are introducing really a lot of pay equity bills, efforts to prevent or limit the use of prior salary. Why should you have to take your pay discrimination with you from job to job like baggage? Okay, no, we don't want that. So getting rid of that, that's a huge thing. That's a thing that corporations just thought they couldn't do without. They're finding that they can. And corporations are now voluntarily saying, we no longer use prior salary, and they're using it as a selling point because they understand that women, and in particular women of color, we matter as consumers, and we're not gonna shop there if we think you're not treating your employees right. And we also are promoting those bills. We've also seen other equal pay measures that try to close the enforcement gap. There have even been some pay transparency measures that have happened at the state level to try to, for state employers and people operating at the state level, to be able to shine a light on what's going on. So there really has been a lot of movement at the state level, movement around minimum wage, the fight for 15, one fair wage right here in DC, paid leave, and I know Carol will talk more about that. There's been tremendous progress. And I know you want to start on a high note, but the problem is, you know, it's like a toothless, you know, tiger, right? A little bit at a time. And that means that in certain places we're really falling through the gap.
So can I add something? I think it matters where you live.
That's
right. But it also means that the DNC has to make that map that says all the places that have already passed paid family leave in several places in the country, including DC, over 32 places where they passed paid sick days on a local or state level, the places where they actually have equal pay protection. All of those are blue states, almost all of them. There's very little, you know, there's not a lot of those activities happening. We haven't been able to penetrate on the workers' rights issues in a lot of the red states. So the challenge for us is to get back and flip some more states so that we can bring these policies, you know, to all the people who are dying for them. I mean, since we've started working on paid family leave and paid sick days, something like 40 million people have access to these laws that never had them before over the last 15 years. And that makes a difference between, to me, paid sick days is about job security. If you know, as I said before, if you stay home sick and you get fired, you're in trouble. You know, you're just, that leads down a path of just crisis and bankruptcy and all kinds of problems. And same thing with healthcare. And so what I think that's really doing that map and saying, where is it? We know that there are pay equity laws all over the country, as Joy said. But we also know that Alabama and Mississippi don't have any.
Right.
Almost nothing. And so how do we really begin to address that and make sure that our politics is lined up with the policies that women are really fighting on these days?
No, that's an excellent point, Carol. Beth, and then we're going to take a minute and pause and go to the audience for, I think we have time for about 1 or 2 questions, and Taylor will be working the mic for us there. But Beth, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to share, I think, 2 positive things and then 1 place we really need to fight. And so first, I want to say we've also been seeing a lot of state legislation protecting access to birth control coverage or expanding access to birth control coverage, including here in the District of Columbia and in states across the country, which is critical in expanding access. Nesting the bad thing in the middle, where we really need to fight back. We also see a Supreme Court nominee in Judge Kavanaugh that could roll back access to the Affordable Care Act, roll back protections for people across the country, roll back access to safe legal abortion, and roll back access to birth control coverage for millions of people. So we have to stand up and say no and fight back on that, because we know, that will hit us as Black women the hardest. And the third thing I want to say on a positive note is when you were talking about Black women run, lead, and vote, I couldn't help but think about representation matters. And we're now in a position where we have a candidate like Stacey Abrams in Georgia who understands pay inequity and has
spoken
lived
eloquently on it.
And knows what it's like to take out loans and knows what it's like to try and move forward and be pushed back down. And will be an advocate in a position of power. And we need more Stacey Abrams across the country. But that is just the biggest embodiment of that. One of the ways we change this.
Yeah. That was excellent point. And so now quickly, any audience questions? I feel like there's one firing up in someone's belly.
There's one.
There's one
there
back
we
here.
go. Miss Linda, stand please.
Good evening. My question is, we know that Black women are the backbone of our party. We know this.
Our nation, yes.
And we've embraced all of the democratic values. But how then do Black women recognize what the DNC is working for? I mean, if the DNC were a mirror, how would Black women see that? And my concern is, it's good to acknowledge a problem, but there has to be something that they see that the DNC is working towards on their behalf, because that is, those are voters we can't afford to lose. And if we don't, if we break a promise, or it just appears to be a promise with nothing to it, we'll lose those voters. And our party can't afford to do that. Not now, not in this administration. We need every Black woman in the country.
Absolutely. So I will take that as the resident DNCer on the at the table. So a couple of things that you said were very important and stood out to me. You said, how do Black women see the things that we're doing at the DNC and then see themselves, right? What's the mirror effect from that? And I think one of the main reasons that the chairman invested in this tour wasn't just so that we can kind of be out here just listening again, right? We've done that over and over and over again. We've actually assigned some action to this work, right? We've also assigned some value to this work. So we're not just listening to Black women, but we're also training with Black women, and we're organizing with Black women. And when we're going into states seeking to help out candidates who are running, we are investing our money in the community with people who are actually from the community. So when we were in Alabama, case in point, Sheila Tyson, who was the councilwoman now she's a commissioner. She just won a commissioner seat in Alabama. She took it to the next level. She said, I went in because I knew Sheila before, and through Black Women's Roundtable and some other groups, and her work was impeccable. She was a grassroots organizer. She had been doing it for years and years and years. There was no reason for us, from my point of view, to parachute folks into Alabama. Being a Mississippian, we don't take kindly to that. And so what the approach was, and is and continues to be, is that before we go in trying to shoot in a solution, we find solutions within the community and we invest with the people from that community. We did it with Sheila, we did it with the Sea Rights with our faith-based organizing, we did it in Huntsville, Alabama with Patrick Grayson. We're taking a different approach to this type of work. We also are investing millions of dollars in base organizers, folks who are from these communities, who know them like the back of their hands, who people know and they trust, and we're seeing results not only in Alabama, which was like groundbreaking, but it's in other pockets of the country. In Georgia alone, we invested 6 figures, I believe, in their vote by mail program that targeted African American rural voters to make sure that folks had access. Barrier, transportation, all of that stuff, that's a part of our lived experiences, right? And so having people who understand others' lived experiences also help us be able to do this work in a real and meaningful way. And so we're putting our money where our mouth is in a lot of instances, so thank you for that. So, again, Black women, run! Black women, lead! Black women, vote! And we also win. So, thank you all so very, very much for joining us tonight. This has been incredible. I hope you feel the energy. Thank you to all of our seat at the table ambassadors. Thank you for all of those out there who are hosting house parties across the country. It is because of you that we are able to do this work and we take it outside of this building. Thank you to all, again, all of you, all of our volunteers, our host, our co-host Renee Johnson, Adwa Biasamoa, the incredible team here at the DNC, our amazing panel. Give it up for them again. We could not have done it without this amazing team of experts.
And to you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And pull it up our seats, because that's half the battle.
Listen, thank you so much, and thank you all again. Also, our vice chair, Karen Carter-Peterson, could not be here with us tonight. She actually had a death in her family, and so we want to keep her in our thoughts and our prayers. Yes, and we really do appreciate her for all of the amazing work that she's been doing across this country. And thank you. See y'all next time. Remember, take your seats.